The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling Meridian manufacturing complex, its golden rays illuminating the steam rising from the industrial towers that had powered the city's economy for over 3 decades. Inside the main production facility, the rhythmic hum of machinery created a symphony of productivity that had become the heartbeat of nearly 2,000 workers who depended on this place for their livelihoods. Marcus Williams pushed his cleaning cart down the central corridor, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished concrete floor. At 50 years old, his movements carried the deliberate precision of a man who had learned to navigate his world with quiet dignity. His uniform, a simple navy blue jumpsuit with maintenance embroidered across the chest, was immaculately clean, pressed with the same care he applied to every aspect of his work. The production line stretched endlessly before him, a marvel of modern engineering where raw steel was transformed into precision automotive components. Marcus had walked this route every morning for the past 3 years, observing the intricate dance of conveyor belts, robotic arms, and hydraulic presses that worked in perfect synchronization. To most, it was merely background noise. To Marcus, every sound told a story. As he approached Section C, where the primary stamping machine dominated the floor space like a mechanical giant, Marcus noticed something different. The rhythm was off, a subtle variation in the hydraulic cycling that made him pause mid-step. He tilted his head, listening with the kind of attention that comes only from years of intimate familiarity with machinery. The machine was running, but not quite right. "Morning, Marcus," called out Jennifer Santos, one of the floor supervisors, as she hurried past with a clipboard clutched against her chest. Her expression carried the stress that had become increasingly common among management as quarterly targets grew more demanding. "Good morning, Miss Santos," Marcus replied with a respectful nod. He had learned long ago that politeness was his shield in this environment, where respect was earned through deference rather than competence. The conversation was interrupted by a sound that every factory worker dreads, the grinding screech of metal against metal, followed by the stuttering rhythm of a machine fighting against itself. The massive stamping press began to shudder, its movements becoming erratic as warning lights flashed red across the control panel. Within seconds, the automated safety systems engaged, bringing the entire production line to a halt, with a finality that seemed to echo through the cavernous space. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the hiss of hydraulic pressure being released and the distant sound of confused voices rising from various corners of the facility. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and moved closer to the machine, his experienced eyes scanning the visible components. The problem was subtle, invisible to casual observation, but unmistakable to someone who understood the mechanical language of industrial equipment. "What the hell just happened?" The voice boomed across the production floor with the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. David Blackwood, the facility's operations manager, strode onto the scene with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his right to command. At 42, his tailored shirt and perfectly pressed slacks stood in stark contrast to the work uniforms surrounding him, a visual reminder of the hierarchy that governed this place. "Sir, the primary stamping unit has shut down," Jennifer reported, her voice tight with anxiety. "The diagnostic system is showing multiple error codes." Blackwood's face darkened as he processed the implications. Every minute of downtime represented thousands of dollars in lost revenue, and the quarterly reports were already showing concerning trends. "Get Rodriguez from maintenance. Call the technical support team. I want this fixed now." As the facility erupted into controlled chaos with supervisors barking orders and technicians being summoned from across the complex, Marcus continued his quiet observation of the machine. The problem was clear to him: a hydraulic pressure imbalance causing the primary cylinder to operate out of sequence with the timing belt. It was the kind of issue that could cascade into catastrophic failure, if not addressed properly. 20 minutes passed before Carlos Rodriguez, the head of maintenance, arrived with his team. They immediately began their systematic diagnostic routine, connecting computer interfaces to the machine's control systems and reviewing the error logs with the methodical approach of trained professionals. Marcus watched from a respectful distance, noting their process while continuing his assigned duties. He had learned to make himself nearly invisible during these crisis moments, understanding that his presence was often perceived as intrusive rather than helpful. "The computer diagnostics aren't showing anything definitive," Rodriguez announced after 30 minutes of investigation. "We're going to need to call in the specialist from the manufacturer." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "How long will that take?" "They're based in Detroit. Best case scenario, they'll be here this afternoon. But with the complexity of this system..." "This afternoon?" Blackwood's voice rose. "We're losing $40,000 every hour this line is down. There has to be something we can do now." It was at this moment that Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Setting down his cleaning cloth, he approached the group of men clustered around the machine's control panel. "Excuse me, sir," he said quietly, addressing Blackwood with the same respectful tone he used with everyone in authority. "I believe I might be able to help." The conversation stopped abruptly. Every face turned toward Marcus with expressions ranging from surprise to barely concealed annoyance. In the 3 years he had worked at Meridian Manufacturing, Marcus had never spoken unless directly addressed, never offered opinions, never stepped outside the invisible boundaries that defined his role. Blackwood looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, his eyes taking in the maintenance uniform, the cleaning cart, the deferential posture. A slow smile spread across his face, not the kind that indicated warmth or welcome, but the type that preceded humiliation. "You think you can help?" Blackwood repeated, his voice carrying enough volume to attract attention from workers throughout the section. "Marcus, isn't it? The janitor thinks he can fix what trained technicians can't figure out." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter spread through the growing crowd of observers. Marcus felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creep up his neck, but he maintained his composure, understanding that retreat now would only amplify the mockery. "I have some experience with hydraulic systems, sir," Marcus said calmly. "I noticed that the primary cylinder seems to be..." "Experience?" Blackwood's voice dripped with condescension. "What kind of experience does a janitor have with million-dollar industrial equipment? Did you learn hydraulics while mopping floors?" The laughter grew louder now, with some workers pulling out their phones to record what was becoming a spectacle. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes upon him, could sense the mixture of second-hand embarrassment and cruel entertainment that his situation provided. "I understand, sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the humiliation. "I simply thought that perhaps..." "Perhaps nothing," Blackwood cut him off sharply. "We have actual professionals working on this problem. What we don't need is advice from the cleaning crew. Stick to what you know, mops and toilets." The words hung in the air with brutal clarity. Several workers shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the unnecessary cruelty in their manager's response, but none dared to speak. The unspoken rules of workplace hierarchy were clear. Challenging Blackwood's authority meant risking one's own position. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the public dismissal with a dignity that somehow made Blackwood's behavior appear even more petty by contrast. "Of course, sir. I apologize for the interruption." As Marcus returned to his cleaning cart, the crowd began to disperse, the brief entertainment over. But Rodriguez, the maintenance supervisor, watched him go with a puzzled expression. There had been something in Marcus's voice, a certainty, a precision in his language, that suggested knowledge far beyond what his position would indicate. "All right, everybody back to work," Blackwood announced. "We'll have this sorted out once the real experts arrive." But as the morning progressed and the production line remained silent, the weight of lost revenue grew heavier. Phone calls were made to corporate headquarters, explanations were demanded, and the pressure mounted with each passing hour. Marcus continued his duties throughout the facility, but his route kept bringing him past the disabled machine. Each time, he observed it with the same quiet intensity, noting details that the diagnostic computers had failed to capture: the slight vibration in the secondary support arm, the inconsistent pressure readings on the hydraulic gauge, the timing mismatch that was so subtle it appeared within normal parameters unless one understood the machine's optimal rhythm. By noon, the specialists still hadn't arrived, delayed by weather and a backlog of emergency calls from other facilities. Blackwood's confident demeanor had given way to visible stress as he fielded increasingly urgent calls from upper management. "Where the hell are they?" he muttered into his phone, pacing near the silent machine like a caged animal. "We can't afford to lose an entire day of production." Standing in the shadows near his supply closet, Marcus watched the unfolding crisis with a mixture of professional sympathy and personal frustration. He knew he could solve the problem in less than an hour, had identified the exact issue within minutes of the breakdown, but the door to offering that solution had been slammed shut with public humiliation. The irony was bitter. Here was a man desperate for answers, surrounded by expensive equipment and highly paid consultants, while the solution stood 30 feet away wearing a janitor's uniform and carrying the invisible weight of dismissed expertise. As the lunch whistle blew and workers filed toward the cafeteria, Marcus remained at his post, meticulously organizing his cleaning supplies while the disabled machine loomed behind him like a monument to wasted opportunity. The question that would haunt the next several hours had already formed in his mind. How long would pride, both his own and Blackwood's, allow this expensive standoff to continue? And more importantly, what would it take for the truth about Marcus Williams to finally emerge from the shadows where it had been hidden for far too long? The afternoon stretched ahead with the promise of mounting tensions, costly delays, and the slow revelation that sometimes the most valuable expertise comes from the most unexpected places. In a world where assumptions ruled and appearances deceived, one man's journey from invisible to indispensable was about to begin. But first he had floors to clean and a secret to keep, at least until the weight of circumstance made silence impossible to maintain. The employee break room at Meridian Manufacturing was a study in functional minimalism. Fluorescent lights humming overhead, beige walls adorned with mandatory safety posters, and a collection of mismatched tables and chairs that had seen better decades. At 12:30 in the afternoon, it was nearly empty, most workers having already finished their lunch and returned to their stations. Marcus Williams sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating a sandwich he had prepared at home that morning. Peanut butter and jelly on white bread, simple, economical, and filling enough to sustain him through the remainder of his shift. Beside his lunch bag lay a worn paperback book, its pages yellowed with age and countless readings. Advanced Hydraulic Systems Engineering, by Dr. Robert Henley. The book was a relic from another life, its margins filled with notes written in Marcus's careful handwriting. Equations, modifications, and theoretical improvements covered every available space on the pages. To any casual observer, it might seem an odd choice of reading material for a janitor, but there were no casual observers here. Marcus had timed his lunch break to avoid the crowds, seeking the solitude necessary to maintain the careful barriers he had constructed around his past. As he turned a page, his fingers traced over a highlighted passage about pressure differential calculations. The irony was not lost on him that the very concepts described in these pages could solve the crisis currently paralyzing the production floor. But knowledge without opportunity was merely academic exercise, and opportunity, he had learned through bitter experience, was often a privilege reserved for those whose credentials were worn on their sleeves rather than hidden in their hearts. The break room door opened with a soft whoosh, and Jennifer Santos entered, looking harried and exhausted. She moved toward the coffee machine with the mechanical purpose of someone running on caffeine and determination. Marcus glanced up briefly, then returned his attention to his book, having learned that eye contact often invited conversation he preferred to avoid. "Rough morning," Jennifer muttered to herself, as she waited for the ancient coffee machine to produce something resembling a beverage. Despite his intention to remain invisible, Marcus found himself responding. The production delay must be creating significant pressure for the supervisory staff. Jennifer turned, seemingly surprised to find someone else in the break room and doubly surprised that it was Marcus who had spoken. In her 3 years of working alongside him, she could count on one hand the number of times he had initiated conversation. "That's putting it mildly," she replied, settling into a chair across from his table. "Corporate is breathing down Blackwood's neck, and he's passing that pressure down to everyone else. The specialists still haven't arrived, and we're looking at potentially losing the entire day." Marcus nodded sympathetically, closing his book and giving her his full attention. Equipment failures can be particularly challenging when they occur without warning. The diagnostic systems often struggle to identify intermittent problems. There was something in his phrasing that made Jennifer pause. The vocabulary, the technical understanding implicit in his words. It was not what she expected from a member of the cleaning crew. "You seem to know something about industrial equipment." A shadow crossed Marcus's face, the brief flicker of memory that always accompanied questions about his background. "I have had some exposure to similar systems in previous positions." Previous positions? Marcus hesitated, weighing his response carefully. The truth was a luxury he had long ago decided he could not afford, but partial honesty seemed safe enough. "Before coming to Meridian, I worked at a smaller manufacturing facility, Hartwell Metal Works, on the south side of town." Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. "I know that place. They closed down about 4 years ago, didn't they?" Economic downturn hit the smaller operations particularly hard. "Yes," Marcus replied simply, though the single word carried the weight of a much larger story. What he did not tell her was that Hartwell Metalworks had been more than just his previous employer. It had been his life's work, his passion, and ultimately, his greatest professional triumph and personal tragedy. For 15 years he had served as the facility's chief mechanical engineer, transforming a struggling operation into a model of efficiency and innovation. He had redesigned their entire hydraulic system, implementing modifications that increased productivity by 30% while reducing maintenance costs. His innovations had caught the attention of larger corporations, and for a brief, shining moment, it had seemed as though his expertise might carry him to even greater heights. The irony was that the very machine now sitting silent on Meridian's production floor was built using principles he had pioneered at Hartwell. The hydraulic sequencing, the pressure management systems, the automated safety protocols, all bore the fingerprints of his engineering mind, though his name appeared on none of the patents or technical documentation. When Hartwell closed, the rights to his innovations had been sold as part of the company's assets. Marcus had watched helplessly as his intellectual property was absorbed into the portfolios of larger corporations, his contributions becoming anonymous elements in mass-produced industrial equipment. "It must have been difficult," Jennifer said gently, "losing your job when the plant closed." "Change is never easy," Marcus replied, though the understatement was so profound it bordered on the absurd. What Jennifer could not know was the cascade of disasters that had followed Hartwell's closure. Marcus had been 57 years old at the time, with decades of experience but no formal engineering degree. His expertise had been earned through apprenticeship and self-education rather than university classrooms. In a job market that prioritized credentials over competence, his applications were dismissed before his qualifications could be evaluated. The savings that were meant to carry him through a brief period of unemployment had been depleted within months. His wife, Sarah, had grown increasingly frustrated with their financial instability, her patience eroding as job rejection followed job rejection. The marriage that had survived 15 years of his 12-hour workdays could not withstand the stress of uncertainty and diminished prospects. "I thought you understood what it meant to be a provider," she had said during their final argument, her voice cold with disappointment. "I married an engineer, not a whatever this is." The divorce had been swift and merciless. Sarah had taken their modest savings, the house they had worked together to purchase, and their daughter Rebecca, who was then 15 and needed stability during her high school years. Marcus had been left with his books, his tools, and a crushing sense of failure that went far beyond professional disappointment. "Did you have family there?" Jennifer asked, interrupting his reverie. "In the area where you worked before?" Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I did. Circumstances changed." The memory of Rebecca's last visit still haunted him. She had been 18 then, about to start college, and had come to his small apartment to inform him that she would be taking her stepfather's name. "It's just easier," she had explained, unable to meet his eyes. "For school applications and everything. You understand, right, Dad?" He had understood, perhaps too well. The daughter he had once taught to identify different types of metal by their sound, who had spent Saturday mornings in his workshop learning the fundamentals of mechanical engineering, had decided that his name, and by extension, his legacy, was a burden rather than a blessing. "Well," Jennifer said, rising from her chair, "I should get back. The afternoon shift is probably wondering where their supervisor disappeared to." As she reached the door, she turned back. "Marcus, that thing you said earlier about offering to help with the machine, that took courage. Blackwood was out of line." Marcus managed a small smile. "Thank you for saying so. I mean it. Sometimes the people with the most to offer are the ones nobody thinks to ask." After Jennifer left, Marcus sat alone with his thoughts and his memories. He pulled out his phone, a simple flip model that he had purchased for basic communication, and scrolled through his short contact list. There, between doctor's office and landlord, was a number he had not called in over a year. Rebecca. His daughter was 24 now, a graduate student pursuing her master's degree in business administration. Her social media profiles, which he checked periodically from the public computer at the library, showed a young woman who had inherited his analytical mind and her mother's social confidence. She was thriving in ways that filled him with pride and broke his heart simultaneously. He had stopped calling after her college graduation, when it became clear that their conversations had become exercises in polite obligation rather than genuine connection. She would ask about his work in the careful, distant tone people used when discussing uncomfortable topics, and he would provide generic updates that revealed nothing of his daily reality. How could he explain that the man who had once been consulted by engineers from companies worth billions now spent his days emptying trash cans and mopping floors? How could he bridge the gap between the father she remembered, confident, knowledgeable, respected, and the man she would see if she visited him now? Marcus returned the phone to his pocket and opened his book again, but the words blurred together as his mind wandered back to the machine sitting silent on the production floor. In his mind, he could see the exact sequence of adjustments needed to restore it to full functionality. The solution was elegant in its simplicity, a 15-minute procedure that would save Meridian Manufacturing hundreds of thousands of dollars and restore productivity to nearly 1,000 workers. But expertise without authority was merely frustration, and authority, in his experience, was rarely granted to those who needed it most. The afternoon whistle sounded, signaling the end of the lunch break. Marcus gathered his belongings, returning the book to a small locker before retrieving his cleaning supplies. As he walked back toward the production floor, he could hear the raised voices of increasingly desperate supervisors and the continued silence of machinery that should have been running. The specialists from Detroit had finally arrived. 3 men in pressed shirts and ties carrying expensive diagnostic equipment and the confident air of professionals who charged premium rates for their expertise. Marcus watched from a distance as they conducted the same systematic evaluation that Rodriguez had performed hours earlier, their computers producing the same inconclusive results. "The diagnostic systems are showing normal parameters across all primary functions," the lead specialist explained to Blackwood, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. "This suggests that the problem may be in one of the secondary systems or possibly a cascade failure involving multiple components." Blackwood's face was growing redder by the hour. "What does that mean in terms of time frame?" "We'll need to perform a complete system teardown. Given the complexity of this equipment, we're looking at a minimum of 12 hours, possibly extending into tomorrow if we encounter unexpected complications." The words hit Blackwood like a physical blow. 12 hours meant losing an entire production day, with costs that would spiral well beyond the immediate revenue loss. Customer orders would be delayed, delivery schedules disrupted, and the facility's reliability reputation damaged. Marcus continued his assigned duties, but his attention remained focused on the unfolding crisis. Every fiber of his professional instincts screamed against the waste of time and resources he was witnessing. The solution was so clear to him that the specialist's methodical approach felt like watching someone search for their glasses while wearing them. As the afternoon progressed, word of the crisis spread throughout the facility. Workers gathered in small groups discussing the implications of extended downtime. Some spoke of potential layoffs if the delays became chronic. Others worried about overtime opportunities being eliminated if production quotas could not be met. Marcus overheard fragments of these conversations as he moved through his cleaning route, each worry adding weight to his internal struggle. These were good people, hard-working individuals with families to support and bills to pay. Their livelihoods were being held hostage by a problem he could solve with his eyes closed. By 4 o'clock, the specialists had begun the process of disassembling major components of the hydraulic system. Their methodical approach, while thorough, was also destructive, removing elements that were functioning perfectly in order to examine them individually. Marcus recognized that their systematic teardown would likely create additional problems, even if they eventually identified the original issue. It was at this moment that a new voice joined the conversation on the production floor. "Excuse me, I'm looking for David Blackwood." Marcus glanced up from his mopping to see a woman in her mid-40s approaching the cluster of men surrounding the disabled machine. She wore a tailored business suit and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. Her badge identified her as Patricia Chen, Vice President of Operations for the entire regional division. Blackwood straightened immediately, his earlier frustration giving way to visible anxiety. "Ms. Chen, I wasn't expecting you." "That's because this wasn't a scheduled visit," she replied coolly. "When one of our most productive facilities goes offline for an entire day, it tends to attract attention from corporate headquarters." The conversation that followed was conducted in the carefully modulated tones of corporate diplomacy, but the underlying message was clear. Blackwood's handling of the crisis was being evaluated, and his performance was found wanting. "I've reviewed the incident reports," Chen continued, "and I'm concerned about the timeline. We have specialists on site, but the estimated repair time continues to extend. What assurances can you give me that this situation will be resolved promptly?" Blackwood gestured toward the specialists, who were continuing their methodical disassembly. "We have the best technical support available. They're conducting a comprehensive diagnostic evaluation, which has produced no results after 6 hours, Chen observed. "Meanwhile, we're hemorrhaging money and disappointing customers who depend on our reliability." Marcus found himself in the unusual position of feeling sympathy for Blackwood, despite the morning's humiliation. The pressure the man was under was visible in every line of his body, every defensive gesture. Leadership, Marcus understood, was often about making decisions with incomplete information under impossible circumstances. But leadership was also about recognizing resources wherever they might be found. And in that regard, Blackwood had failed spectacularly. As the conversation between Chen and Blackwood continued, Marcus made a decision that would change the trajectory of everything that followed. He set down his mop, straightened his shoulders, and began walking toward the group of executives and specialists clustered around the silent machine. The time for silence had passed. The weight of watching good people suffer for the sake of pride and prejudice had become unbearable. Whatever consequences awaited him, they could not be worse than the knowledge that he had allowed preventable harm to continue when he possessed the power to stop it. As he approached the group, Patricia Chen was the first to notice him. Her eyebrows rose slightly at the sight of a janitor interrupting a high-level crisis management discussion. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed at odds with his uniform, "but I believe I may be able to assist with resolving this situation." The silence that followed was profound. Blackwood's face cycled through surprise, recognition, and then anger so intense it was almost palpable. The specialists paused in their work, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented interruption. But it was Patricia Chen's reaction that would prove most significant. Rather than dismissing Marcus immediately, she studied him with the calculating gaze of someone who had not risen to her position by ignoring potential solutions, regardless of their source. "And you are?" she asked. "Marcus Williams, ma'am. I work in facility maintenance." "And what makes you think you can solve a problem that has stumped our technical specialists?" It was the question Marcus had been preparing to answer for the past 6 hours, the moment when his carefully maintained anonymity would either be preserved or shattered forever. The next words out of his mouth would determine not only the fate of the machine but the trajectory of his own future. The weight of that moment, the convergence of expertise and opportunity, of hidden knowledge and desperate need, hung in the air like a held breath. And in that silence, the man who had spent 3 years invisible was about to become impossible to ignore. The silence that followed Marcus's offer stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with tension and possibility. Patricia Chen's calculating gaze moved between Marcus and the expensive diagnostic equipment scattered around the silent machine, her mind processing variables that extended far beyond the immediate crisis. David Blackwood, however, was processing nothing beyond his immediate rage. "This is absolutely ridiculous," he exploded, his voice echoing across the production floor with enough volume to attract attention from workers throughout the facility. "Ms. Chen, I apologize for this interruption. This man is a janitor, a member of our cleaning crew. He has no business involving himself in technical discussions." The words hit Marcus like physical blows, each syllable designed to diminish and dismiss. But after 3 years of similar treatment, he had developed armor against such attacks. He stood quietly, maintaining eye contact with Patricia Chen, while allowing Blackwood's anger to wash over him without response. "Mr. Blackwood," Chen said, her voice carrying the kind of measured authority that made strong men reconsider their positions, "I'm less concerned with job titles than I am with results. We've had certified specialists working on this problem for 6 hours with no progress. If anyone has insights that might resolve this situation, I'm prepared to listen." "But Blackwood began. "He's what?" Chen's interruption was sharp enough to cut glass. "He's wearing a maintenance uniform, so are half the people in this facility who keep our equipment running every day. Continue, Mr. Williams." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward this woman who had created space for his voice in a room where it had never been welcome. But gratitude was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what he was about to undertake. Once he demonstrated his knowledge, there would be no returning to the comfortable anonymity that had protected him for 3 years. "Ma'am," he began, choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that credibility was earned one sentence at a time. "I believe the issue is a hydraulic pressure imbalance in the primary cylinder assembly. The diagnostic computers are reading normal parameters because the problem is intermittent, occurring only when the system reaches peak operational pressure." The lead specialist, Dr. Michael Harrison, looked up from his equipment with an expression of skeptical interest. "The hydraulic pressure has been within normal ranges throughout our evaluation." "That's correct," Marcus replied, moving closer to the machine. "But normal ranges and optimal ranges are not identical. This particular model has a design flaw in the pressure relief valve that becomes apparent only under sustained high-load conditions. The valve releases pressure prematurely, creating a cascade timing error that the safety systems interpret as a catastrophic failure." Dr. Harrison's skepticism deepened. "I've been working with hydraulic systems for 15 years. I'm not familiar with any such design flaw in this equipment line." Marcus nodded respectfully. The flaw was identified and corrected in later production runs, but units manufactured between 2018 and 2020 retain the original valve configuration. The issue can be resolved by adjusting the pressure threshold by approximately 8% and recalibrating the timing sequence to compensate for the modified pressure curve. The technical precision of Marcus's explanation created a ripple of uncertainty among the assembled group. This was not the vocabulary of a custodial worker. It was the language of someone with deep, intimate knowledge of industrial hydraulic systems. Patricia Chen stepped closer to Marcus, her expression increasingly intrigued. "Mr. Williams, how exactly did you acquire this level of technical knowledge?" Before Marcus could respond, Blackwood interjected with renewed vehemence. "This is absurd. We're wasting time listening to theories from someone whose job description involves emptying trash cans. Ms. Chen, with respect, we have actual professionals working on this problem. And how exactly is that working out for us?" Chen's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Dr. Harrison, in your professional opinion, is Mr. Williams's analysis technically sound?" Dr. Harrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of being asked to evaluate the credibility of someone whose background seemed to contradict their expertise. The technical terminology is correct. The theory about pressure valve timing is plausible. Plausible enough to test? Well, yes, but then test it, Chen commanded. Mr. Williams, can you show Dr. Harrison specifically where these adjustments would need to be made? Marcus felt every eye in the vicinity focused on him as he approached the machine's control panel. The moment of truth had arrived, the point where theoretical knowledge would either translate into practical results or expose him as an educated fraud. The pressure adjustment controls are located here, he said, indicating a panel that the specialists had examined but not modified. The timing calibration requires accessing the secondary control system through this interface. As Marcus began to explain the specific sequence of adjustments, his movements took on the fluid confidence of someone completely at home with the equipment. His hands moved across the controls with the muscle memory of experience, identifying connections and configurations that revealed an intimate familiarity with the machinery. Dr. Harrison watched with growing amazement as Marcus navigated systems that should have been foreign to anyone without extensive technical training. How do you know where these controls are located? I've worked with similar systems before, Marcus replied, though the understatement was so profound it bordered on the deceptive. What he did not say was that he had not merely worked with similar systems. He had designed the modifications that made this particular configuration possible. The pressure management protocols Marcus was explaining were based on innovations he had developed at Hartwell Metalworks, improvements that had been incorporated into industrial equipment across the manufacturing sector. Similar systems where? Blackwood demanded, his frustration reaching new heights as he watched a member of his custodial staff demonstrate knowledge that challenged every assumption about workplace hierarchy. Marcus hesitated, understanding that his answer would either legitimize his intervention or provide Blackwood with ammunition to dismiss it entirely. At a smaller manufacturing facility that closed several years ago. What kind of facility? Patricia Chen pressed, her instincts telling her that there was far more to this story than was being revealed. Hartwell Metalworks, Marcus replied quietly. I worked there for 15 years. The name meant nothing to most people present, but Dr. Harrison's expression changed immediately. Hartwell Metalworks? They were pioneers in hydraulic efficiency systems. Some of the most innovative pressure management protocols in the industry came out of that facility. That's correct, Marcus confirmed. What was your position there? Chen asked. Another moment of truth. Marcus could continue the careful deception that had protected him for years, or he could speak the truth that would either vindicate or destroy him. I was the chief mechanical engineer. The statement landed like a bomb in the midst of the assembled group. Blackwood's face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and an anger so intense it seemed to physically transform his features. That's impossible, he sputtered. You're a janitor. You've been a janitor here for 3 years. Yes, Marcus replied simply. I have been. Dr. Harrison was staring at Marcus with the expression of someone reassembling their understanding of reality. Marcus Ems Williams. You're the M. Williams who developed the Cascade Pressure Management System? I contributed to that development, yes. Contributed? Dr. Harrison's voice rose with excitement. You revolutionized hydraulic efficiency in manufacturing. Your innovations increased productivity by 30%. While reducing maintenance costs. You're legendary in hydraulic engineering circles. The revelation hit the assembled group like a physical force. Patricia Chen found herself staring at a man she had assumed was a simple maintenance worker, now understanding that she was in the presence of someone whose innovations had transformed an entire industry. Blackwood, meanwhile, was processing the implications of having spent 3 years dismissing and humiliating someone whose expertise far exceeded his own. The morning's public mockery. Since when does a janitor understand industrial equipment? Now echoed in his mind with devastating irony. If this is true, Chen said slowly, then why are you working as a custodian? The question Marcus had dreaded for 3 years hung in the air between them. The truth was complicated, painful, and deeply personal. A story of economic forces, personal disasters, and the brutal realities of age discrimination in technical fields. Circumstances change, he replied, offering the same diplomatic non-answer he had given Jennifer Santos earlier that day. But Chen was not satisfied with diplomacy. Mr. Williams, if you possess the expertise to solve this problem, then I need to understand why that expertise has been overlooked. Before Marcus could respond, Blackwood erupted with renewed fury. This is all irrelevant speculation. Even if this man has some technical background, he hasn't worked as an engineer in years. Equipment evolves, technology advances. Whatever knowledge he might have had is outdated. Then let's find out, Chen said definitively. Mr. Williams, implement your solution. Dr. Harrison, monitor the results. If this works, we'll discuss the implications afterward. If it doesn't, we'll return to the systematic approach. Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him as he approached the machine's control interface. The next few minutes would either vindicate years of silent expertise or expose him to professional humiliation that would make the morning's mockery seem gentle by comparison. His hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, making the precise adjustments he had identified hours earlier. Pressure thresholds were modified, timing sequences recalibrated, and safety parameters updated to accommodate the corrected operational profile. The work took exactly 12 minutes, a fraction of the time the specialists had spent on their systematic teardown. When Marcus stepped back from the controls, the machine sat in the same silence that had dominated the production floor for the past 8 hours. Initialization sequence complete, he announced. The system should now operate within optimal parameters. Dr. Harrison moved to the master control panel, his expression skeptical despite his growing respect for Marcus's knowledge. Starting primary systems, he announced, activating the sequence that would either vindicate or humiliate the man who had spent the afternoon invisible. The machine hummed to life with the smooth, rhythmic precision that had been absent since the morning breakdown. Hydraulic pressures stabilized within optimal ranges, timing sequences synchronized perfectly, and the entire assembly settled into the productive rhythm that represented successful operation. The silence on the production floor was profound. Not the silence of breakdown, but the silence of stunned amazement. Workers throughout the facility paused in their activities, recognizing that the crisis which had dominated their day had been resolved in a matter of minutes. Dr. Harrison stared at his diagnostic displays with the expression of someone witnessing something that challenged his fundamental understanding of the world. Pressure curves are perfect. Timing synchronization is optimal. System efficiency is actually higher than baseline parameters. Patricia Chen turned to Marcus with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. Mr. Williams, that was extraordinary. But even as the machine resumed its productive operation, Blackwood was processing implications that extended far beyond mechanical repair. For 3 years, he had dismissed, humiliated, and marginalized someone whose expertise could have prevented countless production delays and maintenance issues. The man he had publicly mocked that morning. What kind of experience does a janitor have with million-dollar equipment? Had just demonstrated knowledge that surpassed every technical specialist in the facility. How? Blackwood asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? Marcus looked at him with an expression that carried no anger, no vindication, only the quiet sadness of someone who had grown accustomed to being underestimated. Mr. Blackwood, expertise doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Knowledge doesn't become invalid when someone loses their title or their office. The statement hung in the air with the weight of profound truth. Around them, workers were beginning to return to their stations as the production line resumed its normal operations. But for the small group clustered around the now functioning machine, the day's events had created questions that would not be easily resolved. Patricia Chen was staring at Marcus with the calculating expression of someone recognizing an opportunity that was too valuable to ignore. Mr. Williams, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about your background and your current position. Blackwood felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he realized that the day's crisis had exposed not only mechanical failure, but leadership failure of the most fundamental kind. The implications of having a world-class engineer working as a janitor while production problems went unresolved would not be lost on corporate evaluation of his management effectiveness. But the most significant change was occurring within Marcus himself. For 3 years he had maintained careful invisibility, protecting himself from scrutiny and potential disappointment. Now his expertise had been revealed in the most public way possible, and there would be no returning to anonymity. As the production floor returned to its normal rhythm of productivity, Marcus found himself standing at a crossroads that would determine not only his immediate future, but the trajectory of everything that followed. The question that would dominate the coming hours was not whether his expertise would be recognized. That recognition was now undeniable. The question was what price would be paid for years of wasted potential, and who would bear the cost of that waste. In a world where assumptions ruled and appearances often deceived, one man's journey from invisible to indispensable had reached its crucial turning point. But the most dramatic revelations were yet to come, and the true test of character, both his own and others, was only beginning. The machine hummed with perfect efficiency, but the human dynamics surrounding it were about to become far more complex than any mechanical system Marcus had ever designed. The conference room on the second floor of Meridian Manufacturing had not seen this level of tension since the quarterly budget crisis 3 years prior. Patricia Chen sat at the head of the polished oak table, her laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard as she processed information that was reshaping her understanding of the facility's human resources in real time. Marcus Williams occupied the chair to her right, still wearing his maintenance uniform but carrying himself with a dignity that seemed to transform the simple clothing into something approaching professional attire. Across from him, David Blackwood sat rigid with barely contained anxiety, his earlier confidence replaced by the hollow expression of a man watching his career prospects dissolve before his eyes. Dr. Michael Harrison had positioned himself near the window, laptop balanced on his knees as he conducted rapid internet searches that continued to validate Marcus's extraordinary background. The room's atmosphere was thick with the weight of revelations that had turned the established order upside down in the span of 30 minutes. "Mr. Williams," Patricia Chen began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone conducting an investigation that could have far-reaching consequences. "I've spent the last 20 minutes reviewing your professional history, and I must say, the disconnect between your qualifications and your current position is unprecedented." She turned her laptop screen toward the group, displaying a technical paper published in the Journal of Industrial Engineering. The title read, "Revolutionary Pressure Management in Hydraulic Manufacturing Systems," and the primary author was listed as M. Williams, Chief Engineer, Hartwell Metal Works. "This paper," Chen continued, "has been cited over 300 times in subsequent research. It's considered foundational reading for hydraulic engineering students across the country. You wrote this?" Marcus nodded quietly. "I co-authored it with Dr. Robert Henley from MIT. The research was based on practical applications we had developed at Hartwell." Dr. Harrison looked up from his own laptop with an expression of amazement. "Mr. Williams, I have to tell you, your work was required reading in my graduate program. The cascade pressure management system you developed increased industry efficiency standards by margins that were previously thought impossible." "That's very kind of you to say," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested discomfort with the praise rather than satisfaction. Blackwood had remained silent throughout this exchange, but Chen's next question forced him into the conversation. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm curious about your hiring and management practices. How is it possible that someone with Mr. Williams' qualifications has been working in custodial services for 3 years without anyone recognizing his expertise?" The question hung in the air like an indictment. Blackwood shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing through the implications of his answer. "Ms. Chen, personnel files contain educational and employment history. If Mr. Williams chose not to disclose his engineering background during the hiring process—" "I didn't choose to hide anything," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying a quiet firmness that commanded attention. "My application listed my previous employment at Hartwell Metal Works and my 15 years of experience in mechanical engineering. The issue was not concealment, it was relevance." Chen turned to Marcus with renewed interest. "Explain what you mean by relevance." Marcus took a measured breath. understanding that his next words would either provide context for his situation or expose him to judgment about choices that had been forced upon him by circumstances beyond his control. When Hartwell closed, I was 57 years old with extensive practical experience but no formal engineering degree. My education was acquired through apprenticeships, self-study, and 15 years of hands-on problem solving. In today's employment market, that background is often viewed as insufficient. Insufficient? Dr. Harrison's voice carried genuine disbelief. Your innovations have been incorporated into industrial equipment throughout the manufacturing sector. You're more qualified than most engineers with advanced degrees. Perhaps, Marcus replied diplomatically. But qualifications and credentials are often evaluated differently by human resources departments. Chen was taking notes rapidly, her expression growing more serious with each revelation. Mr. Williams, when you applied for your current position, did you express interest in technical roles within the facility? I applied for every engineering and technical position that became available during my first year of employment. I submitted detailed proposals for efficiency improvements, maintenance protocols, and system upgrades. None of those applications resulted in interviews. The silence that followed was deafening. Blackwood found himself reliving 3 years of dismissed applications, ignored suggestions, and missed opportunities. The man he had publicly humiliated that morning had been attempting to contribute his expertise for years, only to be systematically overlooked and underutilized. Mr. Blackwood, Chen's voice carried a dangerous edge. Are you telling me that you had access to world-class engineering expertise for 3 years and never thought to utilize it? Blackwood's response was barely audible. The applications, they came from a custodial employee. The recommendation seemed inappropriate. Inappropriate, Chen repeated, her tone making the word sound like a profanity. Let me understand this correctly. You received technical proposals from someone whose expertise could have prevented countless production delays and maintenance issues, and you dismissed them because of his job title? The weight of his failures was becoming undeniable. Blackwood thought of the dozens of equipment problems over the past 3 years, the expensive consultant fees, the production delays that had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, all while the solutions walked among them, invisible in a maintenance uniform. Marcus watched this exchange with a mixture of vindication and sadness. The recognition he was receiving felt both long overdue and somehow hollow, a validation that came only after years of being overlooked and dismissed. Miss Chen, Marcus said quietly, if I may, I'd like to address something that I think is more important than my individual situation. Chen gestured for him to continue. This facility employs nearly 2,000 people, many of whom have skills and knowledge that extend far beyond their current job descriptions. The gentleman who works in shipping has a background in logistics optimization. The woman who manages the cafeteria has a degree in nutritional science. The security guard who works nights is a veteran with extensive experience in systems security. Marcus paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. The waste of human potential in this situation extends far beyond my individual case. It's systemic, and it affects the entire organization's ability to recognize and utilize the expertise that already exists within its workforce. Dr. Harrison was nodding vigorously. He's absolutely right. Some of the most innovative solutions I've encountered in my career have come from frontline workers who understand systems in ways that formal training can't replicate. Chen was taking extensive notes, understanding that the implications of the day's discoveries extended far beyond a single personnel issue. Mr. Williams, in your opinion, how many production problems could have been resolved more efficiently if your expertise had been properly utilized? Marcus considered the question carefully. Conservative estimate? 60 to 70% of the mechanical issues over the past 3 years could have been resolved internally, often within hours rather than days. The cost savings in consultant fees alone would likely exceed $2 million annually. The number hit Blackwood like a physical blow. $2 million in savings that had been literally walking the halls of his facility, ignored and underutilized because of assumptions and prejudices he had never thought to question. And the efficiency improvements? Chen pressed. Based on my observations over the past 3 years, Implementing targeted modifications to existing systems could increase overall productivity by approximately 15%, while reducing maintenance costs by 25%. Chen closed her laptop with a decisive snap. Mr. Williams, I'm going to ask you a direct question and I want a completely honest answer. Given what has transpired today, what would you like to see happen moving forward? The question Marcus had not dared to hope for was finally being asked. After 3 years of invisibility, someone in authority was soliciting his vision for his own future. The irony was not lost on him that the opportunity was arising from crisis rather than recognition, but opportunity nonetheless. Ms. Chen, I would like to contribute my expertise to improving the efficiency and reliability of this facility's operations. Whether that's as a consultant, a technical advisor, or in some other capacity, I want to help ensure that the knowledge and experience I've accumulated over 20 years in manufacturing serves a productive purpose. And Mr. Blackwood, Chen turned to the operations manager with an expression that suggested his response would determine his own future. What are your thoughts on Mr. Williams's proposition? Blackwood found himself in an impossible position. Opposing Marcus's advancement would expose him to charges of incompetence and prejudice. Supporting it would require acknowledging 3 years of catastrophic mismanagement. Either path led to professional consequences he was not prepared to face. I think Mr. Williams's expertise would be valuable to the organization, he managed, the words feeling like admissions of guilt. Excellent, Chen replied, though her tone suggested that Blackwood's opinion was no longer particularly relevant to her decision-making process. Mr. Williams, effective immediately, I'm appointing you as senior technical advisor to this facility, reporting directly to me rather than through the existing chain of command. The announcement transformed the dynamics in the room instantly. Marcus felt a surge of emotion that he struggled to contain. After 3 years of professional exile, he was being offered not just recognition, but authority. Blackwood, meanwhile, was processing the reality that the man he had dismissed and humiliated was now essentially his technical superior. The position comes with a salary commensurate with your expertise and qualifications, Chen continued. I'm thinking in the range of $120,000 annually, plus performance bonuses based on efficiency improvements you implement. Marcus felt his breath catch. The salary was more than triple his current income, enough to transform not only his professional situation but his entire life. For the first time in years, possibilities that had seemed permanently closed began to reopen. Thank you, Ms. Chen, he said, his voice thick with emotion he had not anticipated. I accept. Chen stood, signaling that the formal portion of the meeting was concluded. Dr. Harrison, I'd like you to work with Mr. Williams to document his recommendations for system improvements. I want a comprehensive report within 2 weeks. As the group began to gather their materials, Chen turned to Blackwood with an expression that suggested their conversation was far from over. Mr. Blackwood, please remain. We have additional matters to discuss. Marcus and Dr. Harrison left the conference room together, stepping into a hallway that seemed different somehow, brighter, more filled with possibility. As they walked toward the elevator, Dr. Harrison shook his head in amazement. I have to ask, he said, how did you maintain your sanity for 3 years? Knowing what you knew, being capable of what you're capable of, and being treated like a janitor? Marcus finished with a sad smile. Because for 3 years, that's what I was. The expertise was still there, but the opportunity to use it was not. Dignity, I learned, comes from how you conduct yourself, not from how others perceive you. As they reached the production floor, word of Marcus's promotion had already begun to spread. Workers who had barely acknowledged his existence for 3 years were looking at him with expressions ranging from amazement to embarrassment. Jennifer Santos approached with tears in her eyes. Marcus, she said, I had no idea. None of us had any idea. There was no reason you should have, he replied gently. But now you know. And perhaps that knowledge will help all of us recognize expertise wherever it might be found. Meanwhile, in the conference room above, Patricia Chen was conducting a conversation with David Blackwood, that would determine whether his career at Meridian Manufacturing would survive the day's revelations. The weight of 3 years of mismanagement, missed opportunities, and systematic underutilization of human resources was being calculated in real time. But for Marcus Williams, standing on a production floor where he was finally being seen for who he truly was, the most significant challenge was yet to come. Recognition was only the beginning. Now he would have to prove that expertise delayed was not expertise diminished, and that 3 years of invisibility had not eroded the innovation and leadership that had once made him legendary in his field. As the machines hummed with perfect efficiency around him, Marcus realized that the hardest part of his journey was not behind him, but ahead. The transition from invisible to indispensable would require not only technical competence, but the courage to lead people who had spent years not seeing him at all. The question that would define his success was whether recognition, when it finally came, would be enough to overcome the damage that years of dismissal had inflicted on both his confidence and the organization's ability to trust his vision. The machine he had repaired that morning continued its flawless operation, but the human systems surrounding it were about to undergo transformations that would test everyone involved in ways they could not yet imagine. 6 months later, the morning sun cast the same golden rays across the Meridian Manufacturing Complex, but the rhythm of the facility had been transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The machines hummed with an efficiency that exceeded all previous benchmarks. Downtime had been reduced by 73%, and the facility had earned recognition as the most productive operation in the entire regional division. Marcus Williams walked through the production floor with a measured confidence that reflected his new role as senior technical advisor, but also carried the weight of responsibility that came with authority he had waited decades to exercise. His attire had evolved from maintenance uniforms to pressed slacks and button-down shirts, though he still carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had sustained him through 3 years of invisibility. The transformation of the facility had not occurred without challenges. Implementing efficiency improvements across 23 different production lines required not only technical expertise, but the ability to convince workers and supervisors to embrace changes to systems they had operated the same way for years. Marcus had discovered that recognition, while gratifying, brought with it expectations that were often more demanding than the expertise that had earned it. "Morning, Mr. Williams," called out Roberto Martinez, one of the machine operators who had initially been skeptical of taking direction from someone who had recently been part of the custodial staff. "The modifications you made to Line 7 are working perfectly. We're running 15% ahead of quota." "Good morning, Roberto," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. "How are the pressure readings holding up during the extended runs?" "Stable as a rock. I have to admit I wasn't sure about those changes at first, but the results speak for themselves." The conversation represented a microcosm of the broader transformation that had occurred throughout the facility. Initial resistance to Marcus's authority had gradually given way to respect, earned through consistent results and an approach to leadership that emphasized collaboration rather than hierarchy. Jennifer Santos approached with a tablet displaying production metrics that would have been considered impossible 6 months earlier. "Marcus, the quarterly numbers are finalized. Overall efficiency is up 42%, maintenance costs are down 37%, and we've had 0 unscheduled downtime for 11 consecutive weeks." "Impressive results," Marcus acknowledged, though his tone carried more satisfaction with the team's achievements than personal pride. "How are the cross-training programs progressing?" The cross-training initiatives had been one of Marcus's most significant innovations, recognizing that the same assumptions that had hidden his own expertise were likely concealing valuable knowledge throughout the workforce. Workers were now encouraged to share specialized skills and knowledge that extended beyond their formal job descriptions, creating a culture where expertise was valued, regardless of its source. "Remarkably well," Jennifer replied. "We've identified 17 employees with technical backgrounds that were being underutilized. Maria in shipping has helped optimize our logistics protocols. David from maintenance designed modifications that improved our conveyor efficiency. And Sarah from quality control developed testing procedures that caught defects we were missing before." The success stories represented validation of Marcus's fundamental belief that talent existed throughout the organization, waiting to be recognized and utilized. But perhaps more importantly, they demonstrated that the systemic changes he had advocated were creating lasting cultural transformation rather than temporary improvement. As Marcus reviewed the morning reports, his phone buzzed with a text message that brought an unexpected smile to his face. The message was from Rebecca, his daughter, whom he had not spoken to in over 2 years before his promotion had made headlines in industry publications. "Dad, saw the article about your innovations at Meridian in Manufacturing Today magazine. I'm proud of you. Can we talk this weekend?" The reconciliation with Rebecca had been one of the most meaningful consequences of his professional transformation. She had reached out 3 months after his promotion, initially with curiosity about the father she remembered as an engineer but had last known as a janitor. Their conversations had been tentative at first, but gradually evolved into the kind of relationship Marcus had thought permanently lost. "She's graduating with her MBA next month," Marcus had told Patricia Chen during one of their weekly meetings. "For the first time in years, I feel like I have something to offer her beyond apologies for disappointments." Chen had smiled knowingly. Success has a way of opening doors that seemed permanently closed. The observation had proven true in numerous ways. Marcus's innovations at Meridian had attracted attention from throughout the manufacturing sector, resulting in consulting opportunities that extended far beyond his original facility. More importantly, his story had become a case study in recognizing and utilizing hidden expertise within existing workforces. But the most profound transformation had occurred within Marcus himself. The man who had spent 3 years carefully maintaining invisibility now found himself speaking at industry conferences, mentoring young engineers, and serving as an advocate for workforce development programs that looked beyond traditional credentials to identify practical expertise. As the morning progressed, Marcus made his way to the conference room where he conducted weekly meetings with facility supervisors. The group that assembled represented a dramatic shift from the hierarchy that had existed 6 months earlier, a collaborative team focused on continuous improvement rather than rigid adherence to established protocols. "Before we review this week's metrics," Marcus began, "I want to address something that's been on my mind recently." The room fell silent, supervisors giving him their full attention. Marcus had earned credibility not only through technical competence, but through an approach to leadership that emphasized listening and learning rather than commanding and controlling. 6 months ago, this facility was operating at acceptable levels using established procedures and traditional management approaches. We were meeting quotas, maintaining quality standards, and generating adequate profits. By most measures, we were successful. He paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. But success and potential are not the same thing. We were successful while leaving enormous capabilities unrealized. We were meeting standards while ignoring innovations that could exceed those standards dramatically. We were managing people while failing to recognize the full scope of their abilities. Jennifer Santos nodded thoughtfully. "The cross-training programs have shown us how much talent we were overlooking." "Exactly," Marcus replied. "And that raises a question that extends beyond this facility, beyond this company, and into every organization where people work together toward common goals." He moved to the whiteboard and wrote a single question in bold letters. "What expertise are we not seeing?" This question, Marcus continued, should guide every hiring decision, every promotion consideration, and every interaction with colleagues whose contributions we might be taking for granted. The waste of human potential is often invisible precisely because we've become accustomed to seeing people in limited ways. Roberto Martinez, who had initially resisted Marcus's authority, raised his hand. "You're talking about looking beyond job titles and formal qualifications." "I'm talking about looking beyond assumptions," Marcus clarified. "About recognizing that expertise comes from experience, not just education. That innovation comes from understanding systems intimately, not just studying them theoretically. That leadership can emerge from any level of an organization when it's given the opportunity to develop." The discussion that followed was rich with examples of discoveries that had emerged from the new culture of recognition and utilization. Workers who had been overlooked for years were now contributing innovations that saved time, money, and effort while improving quality and efficiency. As the meeting concluded, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. The path from invisible janitor to respected technical leader had been neither linear nor predictable, shaped by circumstances that had tested his resilience and ultimately revealed strengths he had not known he possessed. But perhaps the most important lesson had been about the difference between recognition and validation. Recognition was external, the acknowledgement by others of value and expertise. Validation was internal, the confidence that came from knowing one's worth regardless of external acknowledgement. "I spent 3 years seeking recognition," Marcus had told Rebecca during one of their recent conversations. "But I should have been building validation. Recognition is given by others. Validation comes from within." That afternoon, as Marcus walked through the facility that had been transformed through his expertise and leadership, he encountered David Blackwood near the main entrance. The former operations manager had been transferred to a different facility following Patricia Chen's investigation, but had returned to collect some personal items he had left behind. The encounter was awkward, freighted with the memory of public humiliation and professional consequence. But Marcus approached it with the same dignity that had sustained him through years of dismissal. "David," he said simply, extending his hand. Blackwood hesitated before accepting the handshake. "Marcus, I wanted to apologize for how I treated you, for the assumptions I made, for the opportunities I wasted." "Apology accepted," Marcus replied without hesitation. "We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them." "I've learned a lot," Blackwood said quietly. "About leadership, about recognizing talent, about the cost of prejudice and assumptions." As Blackwood walked away, Marcus felt a sense of closure that had been elusive throughout his professional transformation. The man who had humiliated him had acknowledged his failures and expressed genuine remorse. But more importantly, Marcus realized that his own healing had not been dependent on that acknowledgement. It had come from the work itself, from the opportunity to contribute, and from the recognition that his expertise had value regardless of who chose to see it. The sun was setting as Marcus prepared to leave the facility, the production lines humming with the efficiency that had become their hallmark. His phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca. "Looking forward to our call this weekend. I love you, Dad." As he walked to his car, a modest sedan that he could now afford to replace but chose to keep as a reminder of where he had come from, Marcus reflected on the question that had shaped the past 6 months. What would he have done differently? The answer was complex, nuanced by experience, and sharpened by hindsight. He might have been more assertive in advocating for his expertise, more willing to challenge assumptions about his capabilities, more insistent on being heard rather than accepting dismissal with quiet dignity. But he also understood that his approach, maintaining professionalism despite humiliation, continuing to contribute despite lack of recognition, preserving his integrity despite systemic undervaluation, had ultimately served him well. The expertise that had been ignored for 3 years was now recognized and respected precisely because it had been demonstrated consistently without regard for external validation. The story you have just heard took place in a small office in downtown Detroit, where Marcus Williams now works as a consultant for manufacturing efficiency. I met him during a conference on workforce development, where he was the keynote speaker addressing an audience of over 500 industry professionals. He told me this story during lunch after I asked him about the turning point in his career. "People always want to know about the moment everything changed," he said with a smile. But the truth is, everything had been changing slowly for years. The moment people noticed was just when the change became impossible to ignore. As we finished our conversation, Marcus looked directly at me and asked a question that has stayed with me ever since. "If you were in my position, overlooked, undervalued, and underutilized, despite having expertise that could help everyone around you, what would you have done differently?" He paused, allowing the question to settle, then added, "And remember, the answer you give might reveal as much about your own assumptions as it does about my choices." The question hangs in the air now, challenging each of us to examine our own workplaces, our own communities, our own assumptions about who has valuable expertise and who deserves to be heard. In your workplace, in your community, in your daily interactions, what expertise are you not seeing? And if you were Marcus Williams, standing in a maintenance uniform with world-class knowledge that no one valued, what would you have done differently?